The thunderous rain pounded against the weathered roof of the stagecoach station, as Katherine Morgan clutched her swollen belly and winced through another contraction. Traveling west in 1878 while 8 months pregnant hadn't been her first choice, but after her husband's death in a Philadelphia factory accident, she had nowhere else to go but to her distant cousin's ranch in Colorado Territory. "Madam, you don't look well," the station manager said, his brow furrowed with concern. "The stage ain't coming through tonight with this storm. Creek's flooded something fierce." Katherine nodded weakly, another wave of pain washing over her. She'd been feeling the contractions since morning, but had convinced herself they were just the discomforts of travel. Now, stranded at this remote way station with the baby coming early, panic rose in her throat. "Is there a doctor nearby?" she gasped, steadying herself against the counter. The station manager's weathered face fell. "Nearest doctor's in Silverton, 30 miles west. But we got Thomas Blackwood staying here tonight. He used to be an Army medic during the war. Might be able to help." Before Katherine could respond, the door to the station swung open, bringing with it a gust of wind and rain. A tall man stepped inside, removing his dripping hat. His face was partially hidden behind a neatly trimmed beard, but his eyes, a startling blue against his sun-weathered skin, immediately found hers. "Mr. Blackwood," the station manager called. "This lady's in a bad way. Baby's coming and no doctor for miles." The stranger's expression changed instantly from weariness to alert concern. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his spurs jingling with each step. "Madam," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a formidable presence, "I'm Thomas Blackwood. I've helped deliver a few babies in my time. If you'll allow me to assist you." Katherine nodded gratefully as another contraction seized her, this one stronger than the last. "She can use the back room," the station manager offered. "It ain't much, but it's private." Thomas scooped Katherine into his arms with an ease that belied her advanced pregnancy. "What's your name, madam?" he asked as he carried her toward the small room off the main station house. "Katherine Morgan," she managed between breaths. "My husband was James. He died 3 months ago." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or a shadow of his own loss. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Morgan. Let's focus on bringing your little one safely into this world now." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and exertion. Thomas proved to be both skilled and compassionate, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he helped Katherine through the difficult labor. The station manager's wife appeared from their adjoining quarters to assist, bringing clean linens and hot water. When Katherine finally heard her baby's first cry just before dawn, tears of exhaustion and joy streamed down her face. Thomas carefully wrapped the tiny infant in a clean cloth and placed her in Katherine's arms. "You have a beautiful daughter, Mrs. Morgan," he said, a rare smile softening his weathered features. "She's small but strong." Katherine gazed down at her daughter's perfect face, overwhelmed with love. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've had quite a journey already, haven't we?" Thomas busied himself cleaning up, giving mother and child privacy for their first moments together. When he returned, his expression was serious. "Mrs. Morgan, I don't like to speak ill of your plans, but continuing your journey immediately would be dangerous for both you and your daughter. You need rest, and this little one needs a stable environment for at least a week or 2. Katherine felt fresh tears well up. "But I have nowhere to stay. The stagecoach ticket took nearly all I had left." Thomas hesitated, then spoke decisively. "I have a cabin about 3 miles from here. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid and dry. I'm heading to my brother's ranch for a cattle drive that'll take most of the summer. You're welcome to stay there until you're strong enough to continue your journey." Katherine studied his face, searching for any sign of impropriety or deceit, but found only honest concern. "Why would you do that for a stranger, Mr. Blackwood?" Thomas's gaze dropped to the floor. "I know something about loss, madam. And this country's hard enough without facing it alone with a newborn." As the rain continued to beat against the roof, Katherine looked down at her daughter's peaceful face and made her decision. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We accept your kind offer." The next morning, Thomas secured a wagon from the station manager and carefully helped Katherine and her daughter inside, cushioning the rough bench with blankets. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean sky and muddy trails. The journey to Thomas's cabin was slow and jarring, but he drove with care, avoiding the worst of the ruts. The cabin stood in a small clearing, backed by pine-covered hills and fronted by a modest meadow where a single horse grazed. It was simple but well-built, with a sturdy porch and chimney of river rock. "It's not much," Thomas said as he helped Katherine down from the wagon, her daughter bundled securely in her arms, "but it keeps out the rain and most of the cold." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly clean and orderly. A main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, and simple cooking implements. A narrow doorway led to a small bedroom with a rope bed and handmade dresser. "You and the little one take the bedroom," Thomas said, setting Katherine's small carpetbag by the door. "I'll sleep out here until I leave for the cattle drive day after tomorrow." Katherine surveyed the humble space that would be their sanctuary. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Thomas, please," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. "And no thanks needed. Just trying to be neighborly." That night, as Katherine nursed her daughter by the warm glow of the fireplace, she watched Thomas move about the cabin, preparing a simple supper of beans and corn bread. His movements were efficient and practiced, his presence unexpectedly comforting in this strange new place. "Have you thought of a name for her?" Thomas asked, nodding toward the infant. Katherine smiled down at her daughter. "I think I'll call her Hope. She's all I have left to hope for now." Thomas nodded approvingly. "A good name. Strong but gentle too." He hesitated, then added, "She needs somewhere proper to sleep. The journey ahead will be hard enough without proper rest." The next day, while Katherine rested, Thomas disappeared into a small shed behind the cabin. She could hear the sounds of sawing and hammering throughout the morning. When he finally returned, his shirt damp with sweat, he was carrying a small wooden cradle fashioned from what appeared to be scrap lumber. "It's rough work," he apologized, setting it down beside the bed. "But it should serve until you reach your cousins." Katherine ran her fingers over the simple cradle. Though crudely made, it had been sanded smooth, with no splinters to harm a baby's delicate skin. A rope lattice formed the base, supporting a thin mattress Thomas had fashioned from a folded blanket. "You built this from scraps?" she asked, touched beyond words. Thomas shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just some leftover boards from when I built the shed, not much to it." But Katherine could see the care that had gone into the simple piece. "It's perfect," she whispered, placing Hope gently inside. The baby settled immediately, her tiny hands relaxing as she drifted into sleep. For the first time since James's death, Katherine felt a sense of safety washing over her. She looked up at Thomas, this stranger who had shown such kindness, and felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. Thomas just nodded, his eyes lingering on her face for a moment before he turned away. The following morning, Thomas prepared to leave for his brother's ranch. He'd stocked the pantry with supplies, chopped enough firewood to last several weeks, and left detailed instructions for Katherine about the cabin and surroundings. "My brother's place is about 20 miles southwest," he explained, saddling his horse. "I should be back by late September, but if you need anything before then, the Parkers at the stage station know how to get word to me." Katherine stood on the porch, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. "We'll be fine," she assured him. "And I'll leave everything just as I found it when we continue to my cousin's." Thomas mounted his horse, settling his hat firmly against the morning sun. "No rush on that. Make sure you're both strong enough for the journey first." He hesitated, then added, "It's been nice having someone in the cabin again." With a tip of his hat, he rode away, leaving Katherine and Hope alone in the quiet clearing. Katherine watched until he disappeared among the trees, an odd sense of loss tugging at her heart. The days passed with a gentle rhythm as Katherine recovered her strength and adjusted to motherhood. Hope thrived, growing plumper and more alert with each passing day. The cradle Thomas had built became her favorite place to sleep, and Katherine often found herself running her fingers along its rough-hewn edges, thinking of the man who had crafted it with such care. 2 weeks after Thomas's departure, Katherine felt strong enough to venture beyond the clearing. With Hope secured in a makeshift sling across her chest, she explored the surrounding area, discovering a small creek that bubbled past the north edge of the property, and a wild raspberry patch just beginning to bear fruit. The solitude was healing, giving her time to grieve James properly and to contemplate her uncertain future. Her cousin in Colorado was a distant relation she'd never met, who had reluctantly agreed to take her in out of family obligation. Now, with Hope to consider, Katherine wondered if that was truly the best choice. As July bloomed into August, Katherine established a simple routine. Mornings were spent tending to Hope and the small vegetable garden behind the cabin. Afternoons, she'd work on mending her clothes or reading one of the few books Thomas had left behind, mostly practical guides to ranching and survival in the West, but also a worn copy of Tennyson's poems that showed signs of frequent reading. One sultry afternoon, as Katherine sat on the porch with Hope nursing at her breast, she spotted a rider approaching. Her heart leapt, thinking Thomas had returned early, but as the figure drew closer, she realized it was a woman. Adjusting her shawl for modesty, Katherine waited curiously. The woman reined her horse at the edge of the clearing and called out, "Hello, the cabin. Is Tom Blackwood about?" "He's away on a cattle drive," Katherine responded, rising to her feet. "I'm Katherine Morgan. Mr. Blackwood kindly allowed me and my daughter to stay here while he's gone." The woman approached, studying Katherine with open curiosity. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and laugh lines framing her eyes. "I'm Sarah Parker from the stage station. Thought I'd check on Tom's place while he's away. Didn't know he had company." Katherine explained her circumstances as Sarah dismounted and joined her on the porch, instantly cooing over Hope. "Well, isn't she just the prettiest little thing?" Sarah said, smiling as Hope wrapped tiny fingers around her offered pinky. "Tom's got a good heart, letting you stay. Since his wife and baby died, he keeps mostly to himself." Katherine felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "His wife and baby," Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. "4 years ago now, childbirth fever took them both. Tom was away fighting Apaches with the cavalry when it happened. By the time he got word and made it back, they were already buried. He left the army after that, bought this place, and hasn't let many folks get close since." Suddenly, Thomas's kindness took on new meaning. The gentle way he'd handled Hope, the cradle he'd built, his understanding of her grief, all pieces of a man who had suffered his own devastating loss. "I had no idea," Katherine whispered, looking around the cabin with fresh eyes. Now she noticed what she had missed before: the second cup hanging by the wash basin that never got used, the small carving of a woman's profile tucked on a high shelf, the way the bedroom had been so thoroughly cleared of any feminine presence. "He doesn't talk about it," Sarah said. "But I thought you should know, staying in his home and all." She brightened her tone. "Now I've brought some fresh bread and preserves from town, and I'd be happy to carry any letters you might need posted." Katherine gratefully accepted the provisions and sent a brief note to her cousin, explaining her delayed arrival. After Sarah departed, Katherine sat on the porch for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the clearing and contemplating the man who had shown such generosity despite his own pain. That night, as she settled Hope into the cradle, Katherine found herself imagining Thomas crafting it, his strong hands working the wood, perhaps thinking of the child he had lost. The thought brought tears to her eyes. Late August brought cooler nights and golden afternoons. Katherine had settled so comfortably into life at the cabin that she sometimes forgot it was temporary. She'd added her own touches to the space wildflowers in a jar on the table, a quilt she'd mended draped over the chair, the scent of her baking filling the rooms. Hope had grown remarkably, now sleeping through most nights in her simple cradle, her expressions becoming more animated each day. Katherine was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard hoofbeats approaching. This time, she instantly recognized the rider Thomas's tall figure astride his chestnut horse, returning weeks earlier than expected. Her heart quickened as she raised a hand in greeting. Thomas reined in his horse, surprise evident on his face as he took in the domestic scene before him, diapers and linens flapping on the line. Katherine in a faded blue dress with her hair loosely pinned up, the cabin looking more lived in than it had in years. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, dismounting. "I didn't expect to find you still here." Katherine felt a flush of embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I should have moved on by now. We can leave tomorrow if you know," Thomas interrupted quickly. "That's not what I meant. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. I just thought you'd have continued to your cousins by now." Katherine hesitated, then admitted, "I wrote to let them know we'd be delayed. To be honest, I was in no hurry to leave. Hope has been thriving here and—" She trailed off, unsure how to express the peace she'd found in this simple place. Thomas nodded, his eyes softening as they landed on the clothesline where tiny garments danced in the breeze. "How is the little one?" "See for yourself," Katherine offered, gesturing toward the porch where Hope lay awake in her cradle, making happy gurgling sounds. Thomas approached almost reverently, removing his hat as he peered down at the infant. Hope immediately fixed her gaze on him, her tiny mouth forming an O of surprise at this new face. "She's grown," he said softly. When Hope reached out a tiny hand, Thomas hesitantly extended his finger, which the baby promptly grabbed with surprising strength. A smile transformed his weather-beaten face. "Strong, too. She loves the cradle you made," Katherine said, moving to stand beside him. "It's the only place she'll sleep soundly." Thomas cleared his throat, gently extracting his finger from Hope's grip. "The cattle drive ended early. Drought forced us to sell off more than planned." He gestured toward his saddlebags. "I should get settled. Been a long ride." That evening they shared a simple supper of rabbit stew Katherine had prepared. The conversation was stilted at first, but gradually eased as Thomas recounted tales from the cattle drive and Katherine shared stories of her discoveries around the property. "You've kept the garden better than I ever did," Thomas admitted, accepting a second helping of stew. "And I don't think the cabin's been this clean since." He stopped abruptly, his expression closing. "Since your wife," Katherine finished quietly. When Thomas's head snapped up, she explained, "Mrs. Parker told me about your loss. I'm very sorry, Thomas." He was silent for a long moment, staring into his bowl. Her name was Anna, he finally said, his voice rough. Our son was barely an hour old when she started fevering. By morning, they were both gone. Katherine reached across the table impulsively, placing her hand over his. I can't imagine. Thomas didn't pull away from her touch. Took me a long time to stop being angry at God, the army, myself, everyone really. Still working on that, I suppose. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Seeing you with hope, it reminds me there's still good in this world. The candlelight cast soft shadows across his face, revealing a vulnerability Katherine hadn't seen before. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of shared grief, but also of the possibility of healing. I should check on Hope, Katherine said softly, withdrawing her hand. And you must be tired from your journey. Thomas nodded, rising to his feet. I'll sleep in the shed tonight, give you and the little one privacy. That's not necessary, Katherine protested. We've been using your bedroom, but we can move to the main room. I insist, Thomas said firmly. I've slept in far worse places than my own shed. Later that night, as Katherine nursed Hope by the dying fire, she found herself contemplating the man sleeping just yards away. In the short time she'd known him, Thomas Blackwood had shown more genuine kindness than she'd experienced in years. Her marriage to James had been one of convenience, rather than passion, a respectable arrangement that had provided security but little warmth. James had been a dedicated provider, but an emotionally distant husband. Thomas was different. Despite his gruff exterior, there was a depth of feeling in him that resonated with Katherine's own carefully guarded heart. It was foolish, she knew, to harbor such thoughts about a man she barely knew, a man still haunted by his own tragic past. Yet as Hope drifted to sleep in her arms, Katherine couldn't help wondering what it might be like to build a life here, in this peaceful clearing with the man who had crafted her daughter's cradle with such care. The following days established a new rhythm as Katherine and Thomas navigated sharing the small cabin. Thomas spent most daylight hours tending to neglected chores around the property, mending fences, chopping winter firewood, hunting to stock the smokehouse. Katherine continued managing the household and caring for Hope, but now she also prepared meals for two and occasionally found herself working alongside Thomas in the garden or helping to preserve game for the coming winter. They spoke little of the future, existing in a peculiar limbo where Katherine's temporary presence became increasingly permanent without either of them acknowledging it. September arrived with chilly mornings and occasional afternoon thunderstorms that forced them indoors together, leading to long conversations by the fire as Hope slept peacefully in her cradle. Thomas gradually shared more of his past, his Pennsylvania childhood, his time in the army, his dreams of building a proper ranch someday. Katherine told him of her own upbringing in Boston, her marriage to James, and her fears about raising Hope alone in this unforgiving country. Your cousin in Colorado, Thomas said one evening as they sat shelling peas at the table. What's waiting for you there exactly? Katherine sighed. Very little, I'm afraid. Cousin Abigail married a rancher she met back east. They've offered me a place to stay in exchange for help with household duties. I've never met them, but they were the only family willing to take in a widow with a child on the way. Thomas frowned. Sounds more like they're looking for unpaid help than offering family charity. Perhaps, Katherine admitted, but beggars can't be choosers. Without James's income, I had few options. You could stay, Thomas said suddenly, then immediately looked as surprised by his words as Katherine felt. He set down the pea pod he'd been working on. I mean, winter's coming. Traveling with a baby through mountain passes isn't safe this time of year. You could wait until spring. Katherine's heart quickened. Are you certain? We've imposed on your hospitality for so long already. It's no imposition, Thomas said quietly. Truth is, the cabin hasn't felt like a home in years. Not until you and Hope came along. The admission hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Katherine found herself unable to meet his intense gaze, focusing instead on the peas scattered across the table. "We'd be grateful to stay through winter," she finally said. "If you're sure." Thomas's smile was brief but genuine. "I'm sure." With their arrangement extended, Thomas threw himself into preparations for winter with renewed energy. He built up the woodpile until it stood taller than Katherine, hunted elk and deer to smoke and preserve, and repaired every gap and crack in the cabin's walls and roof. "We'll need more supplies from town," he announced one morning in early October. "Would you and Hope like to come along? Might be your last chance before the snows make the trip difficult." Katherine agreed eagerly, having not left the property since her arrival months earlier. The journey to the small settlement took most of the morning, with Thomas driving the wagon carefully to avoid jostling Hope, who watched the passing scenery with wide, curious eyes from Katherine's lap. The town of Pine Creek was little more than a wide spot in the trail: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of rough cabins clustered around a dusty main street. Yet after months of isolation, it seemed bustling to Katherine. As Thomas helped her down from the wagon, she noticed the curious stares from townsfolk. A few nodded in greeting to Thomas, their eyes lingering on Katherine and Hope with undisguised interest. Inside the general store, the proprietor's eyebrows shot up at the sight of them. "Blackwood. Didn't expect to see you with company. Mrs. Morgan and her daughter are staying at my place through winter," Thomas said matter-of-factly, handing over a list of supplies. "The passes to Colorado would be too dangerous for them now." The storekeeper's wife emerged from the back room, immediately cooing over Hope and peppering Katherine with questions about the baby. Katherine answered politely, acutely aware of the assumptions likely being made about her relationship with Thomas. As Thomas settled their account, Katherine wandered to the window, rocking Hope gently in her arms. Outside, she noticed a group of men gathered around their wagon, one running his hand along the side in a way that seemed oddly proprietary. "Thomas," she said quietly, nodding toward the window. "Those men seem rather interested in our wagon." Thomas glanced outside, his expression hardening. "Stay here," he instructed, striding toward the door. From inside, Katherine watched as Thomas approached the men. Though she couldn't hear the exchange, she could see Thomas's posture straight-backed and imposing, one hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. After a brief conversation, the men dispersed, one of them spitting in the dirt as they walked away. When Thomas returned, his face was grim. "Let's finish up our business. I'd like to get back before dark." As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Katherine finally asked, "Who were those men?" Thomas secured a sack of flour before answering. "Harlan Webster and his boys. They run a ranch north of here. Been trying to buy my place for years to expand their grazing land. They don't take rejection well." "Are they dangerous?" Katherine asked, instinctively holding Hope closer. Thomas helped her into the wagon before responding. "They can be. Webster likes throwing his weight around. But they won't bother us at the cabin. They know I'm not an easy target." The journey home was tense, with Thomas frequently checking behind them, though they saw no sign of being followed. As the cabin came into view, Katherine felt a surprising sense of relief and homecoming. That night, after Hope was asleep in her cradle, Katherine found Thomas on the porch, smoking a pipe and staring into the darkness. "Are you worried about those men?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Thomas sighed, knocking his pipe against the railing. "Not exactly, But seeing them reminded me that this isn't just about us anymore. Having you and Hope here, it changes things." "How so?" Katherine asked, moving to stand beside him. "People will talk. They already are. A man and woman living together unmarried with a child in the mix. It could cause problems for you, for your reputation." Katherine hadn't considered this aspect of their arrangement. In the isolation of the cabin, societal conventions had seemed distant and irrelevant. But the curious stares in town had made it clear their situation was highly unusual and potentially scandalous. "I hadn't thought of that," she admitted. "But surely once winter passes and we move on to my cousins, the gossip will die down." Thomas turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Is that still your plan? To leave in spring?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had dared voice. Katherine found herself at a crossroads, the safe, predictable path to her cousin's ranch, or the uncertain future that had begun to take shape in her heart. "I don't know any more," she whispered honestly. "These past months have been unexpected. I found peace here that I never thought possible after James died." Thomas moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. "Katherine," he said, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "I need to be honest with you. I don't want you to leave. Not in spring, not ever." Katherine's breath caught. "What are you saying, Thomas?" He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers engulfing hers. "I'm saying that watching you with Hope, seeing you bring life back to this place, it's healed something in me I thought was broken for good." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I'm saying I have feelings for you that go beyond friendship or charity." Katherine's heart pounded in her chest. "Thomas, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "It's a lot to consider, I know. And maybe it's too soon after your husband, or too much given everything you've been through. But I wanted you to know where I stand before you make any decisions about spring." Before Katherine could respond, a cry came from inside the cabin, Hope awakening for her nighttime feeding. The moment broken, Katherine squeezed Thomas's hand once before pulling away. "I should tend to her," she said softly. Thomas nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Of course." "Good night, Katherine." As Katherine nursed Hope in the quietness of the bedroom, her mind whirled with Thomas's confession. Her feelings for him had grown steadily over their time together, but she'd been hesitant to examine them too closely. Now, forced to confront the possibility of a future with him, Katherine found herself both thrilled and terrified. Marriage to Thomas would mean committing to this life permanently, the isolation, the harsh winters, the demands of building a ranch from nearly nothing. It would mean trusting her heart to a man still haunted by his own tragic past. Yet it would also mean giving Hope a father who already cherished her, and building a life with a man whose quiet strength and kindness had already begun to capture Katherine's heart. As October gave way to November, the first significant snowfall blanketed the clearing, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse. Confined to the cabin by the weather, Katherine and Thomas's daily interactions took on a new intensity, each acutely aware of the other's presence in the small space. Thomas had not pressed Katherine for an answer to his unspoken proposal, but his feelings were evident in 100 small gestures, the way he'd placed a protective hand at her back when she ventured onto the icy porch, how he carved small wooden toys for Hope during the long evenings, the tenderness in his eyes when he thought Katherine wasn't looking. Katherine found herself responding in kind, preparing his favorite meals, mending his shirts with special care, sitting closer to him than strictly necessary as they shared the warmth of the fire. They existed in a state of sweet anticipation, their feelings acknowledged but not yet fully embraced. On a particularly cold morning in late November, Catherine awoke to find Thomas already gone from the cabin, his coat and hat missing from their pegs by the door. Hope was still sleeping soundly in her cradle, her cheeks flushed pink with warmth. Catherine stoked the fire and began preparing breakfast, wondering what had drawn Thomas out so early in the bitter cold. Her answer came an hour later when he returned, snow dusting his shoulders and a small pine tree in his arms. "What's this?" Catherine asked, laughing as he propped the tree in a corner of the main room. "Christmas is coming," Thomas explained, brushing snow from his beard. "Thought the place could use some cheer." Catherine's heart swelled at the thoughtful gesture. "It's perfect." "I worried Hope's first Christmas would be rather bleak, given our circumstances." Thomas removed his coat, hanging it by the fire to dry. "Nothing bleak about Christmas, no matter how simple. My mother always said it's about the people you share it with, not the trimmings." Over the next few days, they prepared simple decorations for the tree: strings of dried berries, pine cones dusted with flour to resemble snow, and small figures Thomas whittled from scraps of wood. Hope watched the proceedings with fascination, her eyes tracking the shiny objects as Catherine hung them on the fragrant branches. As Christmas approached, Catherine secretly worked on gifts for Thomas during Hope's nap times: a new scarf knitted from yarn she'd unraveled from one of her own shawls, and a small sketch of Hope sleeping in the cradle he'd built, drawn on the blank page of one of his books. Thomas was equally secretive about his own projects, disappearing into the shed for hours despite the cold, refusing to let Catherine see what he was crafting. The anticipation brought a festive spirit to the cabin despite their isolation and limited resources. Christmas Eve arrived with another heavy snowfall. After a simple supper, they sat before the fire, Hope dozing contentedly in Catherine's arms as Thomas read the Christmas story from his worn Bible, his deep voice lending gravity to the familiar words. When he finished reading, Thomas set the Bible aside and cleared his throat. "I have something for you and Hope, for Christmas." "It's not Christmas yet," Catherine protested with a smile. "This one can't wait until morning," Thomas insisted, rising to fetch something from behind the woodpile. He returned with an object covered by a blanket. Setting it between them, he carefully pulled the covering away to reveal a rocking chair expertly crafted from the same pine as Hope's cradle, but with elegant curves and smooth arms, each detail carefully considered and beautifully executed. "Thomas," Catherine breathed, running her hand along the polished wood. "It's beautiful. When did you find time to make this?" "Been working on it whenever you and Hope were napping," he admitted. "Thought it might make those late-night feedings easier on your back." Catherine settled into the chair, testing its gentle rocking motion with Hope still nestled in her arms. It fit her perfectly, the height and angle exactly right for her frame. "This isn't just scrap wood," she observed, noting the quality of the lumber. "Had some boards I was saving for something special," Thomas said, watching her with evident pleasure at her reaction. This seemed right. The care and thought behind the gift moved Catherine deeply. This wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a declaration of Thomas's desire to make a permanent place for her and Hope in his home and life. "I have something for you too," Catherine said, "though it pales in comparison to this." "Anything from you would be precious to me," Thomas said simply. Catherine gently transferred Hope to her cradle and retrieved her gifts from their hiding place. Thomas accepted them with reverence, examining the carefully knitted scarf and the sketch with equal appreciation. "No one's made me a gift in years," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." As Hope slept peacefully in her cradle and the fire cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, Catherine found herself overcome with the rightness of this moment, this man, this child, this simple home they had created together. "Thomas," she said softly, "I've been thinking about what you said. About spring and us." He looked up, his expression cautiously hopeful. And Katherine moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "I don't want to leave in spring, or ever. These past months with you have shown me what a true partnership can be, what a family should feel like." She took a deep breath. "I love you, Thomas Blackwood. If you still want us to stay." Thomas pulled her into his arms, cutting off her words with a gentle kiss there first. When he pulled back, his eyes shone with emotion. "I love you, Katherine. You and Hope are the greatest gifts I could have ever received. Of course I want you to stay." As they held each other before the crackling fire, Hope sleeping peacefully in the cradle Thomas had built from scrap wood those many months ago, Katherine felt a sense of completion she had never known before. Their journey had begun in crisis and uncertainty, but had led to this moment of perfect clarity, the knowledge that home wasn't a place, but the people with whom you shared your heart. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a glittering wonderland. Katherine awoke to find Thomas already up, Hope cradled in his arms as he pointed out the frost patterns on the window to her attentive gaze. "Merry Christmas," Katherine said, her heart full at the sight of them together. Thomas turned, his smile warm. "Merry Christmas." This little lady was awake early, excited for her first Christmas, I think. Katherine joined them by the window, slipping her arm around Thomas's waist as they stood together as a family, watching the sun rise over their snow-covered clearing. Later that day, as they shared a modest Christmas feast of roast rabbit and preserved vegetables, Thomas reached across the table to take Katherine's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "If we're to make this arrangement permanent, we should do it properly." "For Hope's sake and for yours," Katherine's heart quickened. "What are you suggesting?" "Marriage," Thomas said simply. "As soon as the pass is clear enough for us to reach the church in Pine Creek. If you'll have me, that is." Katherine's eyes filled with happy tears. "Yes, Thomas, I'll have you." Over the long winter months that followed, they planned their future together. Thomas sketched designs for expanding the cabin to accommodate their growing family, while Katherine planted seeds in small pots on the windowsill, preparing for spring gardens. Hope flourished, learning to smile, then laugh, then sit up on her own, delighting in the attention of both adults. When March brought the first real thaw, Thomas rode to town to make arrangements with the minister. Katherine used the opportunity to make adjustments to her best dress, adding touches of lace saved from her trousseau to create a suitable wedding gown. Early April brought a spell of clear weather, and with it, their wedding day. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by the Parkers from the stage station, Thomas's brother and his family, and a handful of neighbors who had braved the muddy roads to witness the union. Hope, now nearly 9 months old, sat contentedly on Sarah Parker's lap during the ceremony, dressed in a gown Katherine had fashioned from one of her own petticoats. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Thomas kissed Katherine with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The small reception at the Parkers' home afterward was full of good wishes and gentle teasing about their unconventional courtship. Katherine found herself drawn into conversations with women eager to welcome her to the community, while Thomas received hearty congratulations from men who had known him since his arrival in the territory. "Never thought I'd see Tom Blackwood smiling again," one elderly rancher commented to Katherine. "You've brought him back to life, young lady." As they drove home that evening, Hope sleeping between them on the wagon seat, Katherine leaned against Thomas's shoulder, savoring the rightness of becoming a true family at last. "Mrs. Blackwood," Thomas said, testing the sound of her new name. "Has a nice ring to it." Katherine smiled up at him. "Indeed it does, Mr. Blackwood." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges as they built their life together. Thomas's small ranch grew steadily, with the addition of more cattle and eventually several good horses. The cabin expanded too, first with a proper kitchen and larger bedroom, then with a second bedroom when Hope turned 3 and her brother Thomas Jr. arrived. The cradle that Thomas had built from scrap would that first desperate night continue to serve each of their children, first Hope, then Thomas Jr., followed by twins Anna and James 2 years later. Though Thomas offered to build a newer, finer cradle for each child, Katherine insisted on using the original, believing it carried the blessing of their beginning as a family. By the time Hope was 10, the Blackwood Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the area. The Harlan Webster who had once threatened them had moved on after a disastrous winter decimated his herds, selling his land to Thomas at a fraction of what he'd once demanded for Thomas's property. One summer evening, as Katherine sat on the porch in the rocking chair Thomas had given her that first Christmas, watching their 4 children play in the yard, Thomas settled beside her, taking her hand in his. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, following her gaze to where Hope was teaching the twins how to make daisy chains. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Katherine replied, squeezing his hand. "That night at the stage station seems like another lifetime ago." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I remember looking at you holding newborn Hope and thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Never imagined you'd end up changing my life the way you have." "We changed each other's lives," Katherine corrected gently. "You gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to turn. You built Hope's cradle from scraps when she needed a safe place to sleep. And you rebuilt me from the scraps of who I was," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "Made me whole again when I thought that wasn't possible." Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her as their children's laughter rang across the yard. From desperate beginnings in a storm-lashed stagecoach station to this moment of perfect peace, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way. The simple cradle that had started it all now sat in their attic, carefully preserved for the day when Hope or one of her siblings might need it for their own children. A humble piece crafted from scrap wood, yet as precious to Katherine as any fine heirloom could ever be, a tangible reminder of the night a grieving cowboy had opened his heart to a widow and her newborn daughter, and in doing so, found his way home.